Enshrouded is more about survival than ever before. They made it so you can change the difficulty of the game. You can make it super easy, almost pretty much creative mode, and you can make it super difficult. But they had some presets, and one of the presets was called survival. We played that, folks, and this is kind of what we thought about Enshrouded on survival difficulty.
Before Enshrouded was what we like to call diet survival or survival light. It had some survival mechanics. It kind of went in that survival direction, but it wasn't quite embracing survival fully.
Enshrouded to me always felt like they had the survival mechanics just as kind of like a way to kind of hinder the player a little bit, but the survival mechanics were never really fleshed out. The food was a bonus. You hardly ever had to worry about any other kind of survival mechanics, such as where's water, or I don't have enough food, or I need to go hunting, etc., etc. It was more about, yeah, the food buff actually helps you, and if you don't eat it, you're worse at combat, but you can still progress through the game because it's an RPG.
Yeah, and originally the food was only a benefit of giving you extra stamina, extra health, and a few of the food items actually healed you faster or gave you like renewed your stamina faster.
I have to say though, even though I could change all these sliders and everything else, the food mechanic still was lacking. I could die of starvation. Finally, that was a really cool mechanic. But food is so plentiful in this game. I just never really was dying of starvation unless I was going AFK.
Now the survival mode is just a higher difficulty level. I wouldn't even really consider it a survival mode. The only extra survival mechanic it adds, like you said, is being able to starve from not eating food. But the problem with that is it doesn't matter what you consume, whether it's an uncooked berry, whether it's water, whether it's a batch of honey, it resets your hunger meter completely, anyways. You can consume the lowest tier food and the lowest level food, and it still gives you the same amount of time before you starve as if you cooked a gourmet meal in survive in enshrouded.
Yeah, definitely. Back before the update, I was often only eating things for pure stamina. Actually, my producer will get mad at me if I don't say this right. Stamina. And that was one of the things I only ever used it for, was to be able to go mining or have a lot of stamina to be able to glide from the Overwatch towers to be able to get to other areas. But I never really used the food buffs for anything else. And in survival mode, the fact that I could eat even berries to just reset it didn't really make much of a difference. It was the combat that made the difference. And honestly, as an RPG, it's amazing that the combat's harder. But as a survival game, I don't really see how the combat made it harder for me to survive.
Yeah, I don't think the upped mechanics and the starvation mechanic make it survival. I think we're stepping in the right direction. And I think if they decide to build on this, we can get closer to a true survival game or get away from the diet survival that what we consider enshrouded now. But I don't think what survival mode is currently is quite enough. Yes, it does make the game more difficult. The combat's harder. I died from bees when I was playing yesterday at level 1. I've never died from bees in the game before. Yesterday I died from bees. So yes, the combat's harder. The enemies hit harder. It's easier. It's a lot easier to die from the enemies, but it's so easy to avoid starving that it's almost like the starvation mechanic and the food mechanic just still doesn't matter enough.
Mind you, this is a world 1,000 years later, and it's supposed to be ravaged by this shroud. But like, I probably have like 30 pieces of rabbit meat in my inventory, and I'm only level 2, and I have yet to beat the first boss because of how difficult it is on the survival mode. Which I like the difficulty of combat, but difficulty of combat is more of an RPG mechanic than it is a survival mechanic.
I'm in agreement with you. The only thing I add is that I don't think the food mechanic is quite taxing enough because it doesn't matter what you eat or what you drink. If you drink the water, it resets your food counter completely. So if you eat the a piece of food that is the minimum amount of time for the buff, I think it's one of the berries that only gives you like a minute or two of food time. It completely resets your starvation clock, which is not that long anyways. But every piece of food, no matter how small, completely resets that clock back to zero, and or back to the top and starts counting down again. I think that if that is changed, that could help make it more survival.
What I would change to make survival mode more survival, or rather adding in new ways for people to make it into the survival game that people want, is I think food and water should be separate ways of actually surviving. You can die of dehydration or you can die of food. And I think it would unlock the extra fourth food slot that they already have in the game. And that food extra fourth slot would be for water only, or for some other kind of drink later on in the game. But I think that that's actually where it can kind of help, is that the food should be harder to get as well. Like animals should be less appropriate. Wolves should give little to no meat whatsoever. There should be other mechanics happening where overall surviving itself is just a bit more difficult. Life seems like you're not constantly running out to get into your next combat fight with the next big boss. You're preparing for that fight because the journey is going to take you a little bit longer to get there, so you actually have to go around hunting in larger areas, and maybe you do get into more combat because you had to go further out outside your base to go hunting.
Yeah, I would like to see a completely different survival mode. Something that's not just a difficulty setting. I'd like to see something that doesn't follow the story of Enshrouded. Because right now, you start survival mode and it's literally just the story of Enshrouded all over again, just with the starvation mechanic added in and the harder difficulty. I'd like to see more of like a sandbox thing, kind of like Green Hill, where you have the story mode you can follow in Green Hill, but then you have this separate game mode that just kind of sticks you out in the middle of the world and you have to survive. I was kind of hoping for that from survival mode of Enshrouded, where it would just put you in a random place in the world and now you've got to fight off the wolves in order to build your base. You've got to fight off the Enshrouded guys at night so you can get set up. You've got to find the different tiers of building materials and upgrades and stuff in a different way than you do in the basic story mode in order to make this more survival. I think that would take us a little bit closer to a survival mode than what we have now.
Yeah, and other small changes could be that the people that you find inside the vaults or what have you also can die. And I think that would play really well into like kind of defending your base from whatever comes at it. Now, I'm not talking about full fledged raid mechanics and that kind of stuff, but more of a, it gives you a reason to purposely try to keep them safe because you're the one that is fighting the enshrouded and is capable of doing it, as it's mentioned in the entire storyline. But I like the idea of as a completely separate, like almost sandbox or survival mode that doesn't necessarily play 100% into the main story, but you can still find storyline elements throughout the map. I kind of like that overall.
Yeah, I don't think removing the story completely is necessary, but I think going about it in a different way would make this feel more survival than what we have now. Again, just starting at scene 1 in the story in survival mode just immediately took me out of like survival game mindset.
Yeah, definitely. Well, folks, this has been our take on Enshrouded and if it is becoming more of a survival game. Overall, I would have to say we're looking forward to seeing more survival features coming forward in the future. Join me in thanking Dimension 119 being here as our co host and our producer, Red Falcon, in the background, making sure everything works well and also helping me pronounce stamina. Thank you very much for watching today's survival, folks. Ta ta for now.
See you in another dimension.